So with that, I'm going to give up the balance of my time to our next speaker, and I've been asked to introduce him. And of course, in Las Vegas, I made the faux pas of saying he's a man who needs no introduction. That will not happen again. I'm delighted to introduce Mr. Tom Woods, actually Dr. Tom Woods. His best-selling book, Meltdown, is one that you should all read. It's a very interesting look at the financial crisis that we've been going through and are still enduring the pains of. In addition, Tom is a senior fellow of the Mises Institute. He's the editor of the Journal of Libertarian Studies and a contributing editor of the American Conservative. And it goes on and on and on. As a matter of fact, I could go on for 10 minutes. So rather than do that, I'm going to let him do the talking. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Tom Woods.
Thanks, everybody, very much. Oh, my goodness, what a booming microphone this is. Man, oh man, if I have any little asides I want to utter under my breath, they're all going to be picked up. Okay, let me first let me point out that I still do need my full time, even though we're a little over time. I still need to use my full time. If you've seen the outline, you'll see we need the full time, so sorry about that. But and people are applauding that. See, this is the difference between when I used to be a college professor and now. Normally, if you were to come in late and say, however, I need to keep you for the full time, there'd be an assault. And let me also start out by explaining what it is what I'm doing today. And when they ultimately release this as a video, they'll cut out this part. So I'll start out in a couple minutes as if those are my first words. But I want to preface this by explaining to those of you who have not been to another one of these regional conferences of the Campaign for Liberty, that my role at these events has been twofold. Number one, I've been speaking sometimes at the evening events, as I'll do tonight, in which I tend to be more jokey, and there's a lot more red meat thrown out there. But during the day, the idea is that at each one of these events, I will speak on some foundational topic in a 50-minute period and try and give people as good and solid an introduction to it as I can, and then they'll put all these together in some kind of product. So up to now, for example, I've done, in St. Louis, I gave a Jeffersonian overview of the Constitution. I've done one on sound money. I've done one in light of all the state sovereignty resolutions. I've done one on the relationship between the states and the federal government to show that people who are making the argument for state sovereignty are 100% dead right, historically and constitutionally. And so today I'm going to talk about, again, a completely different topic, and that is the subject of individual rights, which of course is foundational to what we're doing. So understand that if anyone has told you, hey, this Woods guy, I heard he's kind of funny. If I'm not that funny right now, don't form your permanent judgment of my sense of humor, okay, until tonight. And then if it turns out I'm still not funny, then I think you're more justified in rendering your judgment. So, okay, so now we'll just pause and say, well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are, starting our session. Oh, good. Applause. Wonderful. Let's see. All right. So what we're going to do is talk about individual rights, and I've got an awful lot of material on here. So we're just going to zoom on through it, baby. And if you miss something, you can wait 8 months for this to come out and watch it, or you can ask me later. I've also got copies of 5 of my titles available for purchase, and I want you to purchase them only on their merits, not because I'm telling you that we're expecting our 4th child in February and we're going to need some extra cash. That's irrelevant, okay? Just on their merits, I want you to consider purchasing them. So I guess those of you who are here with me today have got this outline, and I think it's on pink sheets, so we're going to get in touch with our feminine side, start looking at this outline. And so if you have the outline, it's easier to follow along. That's why I make them. So first, before we talk about rights, we've got to define what the term means. What exactly is a right? There are a great many definitions of rights, but one that I like and that others in this sort of tradition like comes from a guy who's still alive, Father James Sadowski, who was a professor of business ethics at Fordham for many years, one of the few non-commie professors of business ethics, by the way. And Sadowski's definition is as follows. He says, "When we say that one has the right to do certain things, we mean this and this only, that it would be immoral for another, alone or in combination, to stop him from doing this by the use of physical force or the threat thereof." Now notice he does not say, in fact he goes on to clarify this, he says, "We do not mean that any use a man makes of his property within the limits set forth is necessarily a moral use." So people may do something that's immoral and still, strictly speaking, be within their rights. So not every vice is or should be criminalized. So you can break promises, by and large. You can be a liar. You can be late all the time. But by and large, these aren't things we're going to throw you in jail for. I mean, strictly speaking, you have a natural right to be late, even if it's really annoying. So in other words, a right is, in effect, it's a sphere of action in which you can act and in which it would be morally wrong for anyone to interfere with you violently or with the threat of violence. Now, I think it's been taken for granted by many people that rights and rights language is a relatively recent development in the history of Western civilization. But I think that's not correct. It depends on how you define recent. A lot of people were of the opinion, until relatively recently, that really this is a 17th century development, and John Locke and others were really the first to start talking about rights and using the language of rights. That thesis has by and large been abandoned by scholars, because it now looks as if the history of rights goes back a lot farther in the history of Western civilization, goes back at least to the 12th century. So it goes actually back to the Middle Ages, where we start to hear the language of rights. And I refer in my sources at the end of the outline to a book by Brian Tierney called The Idea of Natural Rights, and he's really the pioneer in this area, and he elaborates on some of these points. But we see it all throughout Europe by the 12th century, and we hear it being used in this sense, that the Lord has rights, vassals have rights, popes have rights, kings have rights, cities have rights. So these aren't quite natural rights, because a natural right is a right that's enjoyed by all people by virtue of being human, not by virtue of being a pope or a king or a lord or a vassal. So these aren't natural rights, but nevertheless, the language of rights permeates European society by this time. And even though they're not quite natural rights yet, once you start talking about rights, there's a certain internal dynamic to them that is going to lead us down the path to natural rights. And just to give you one example, medieval cities were really oases of freedom amidst an otherwise social system of stagnation, such that the various cities of medieval Europe did enjoy certain rights vis-a-vis political authorities. And they would insist on the expansion of these rights over time. And one of the rights the cities typically enjoyed was that if you lived in a city for a year and a day, undetected, you were free of all servile obligations. So if a serf managed to flee and live in a city for a year and a day, nobody could come and try and take him away. That was one of the rights of the cities, that we can protect these people. So there was a case, for example, when the Count of Flanders happened to be in a nearby city, and he spotted one of his old serfs who had lived there longer than a year and a day, and he and his goons tried to snatch him out, and the townspeople drove them out and protected this former serf, because they were protecting what was understood to be a traditional right of the cities.